You are far more than your race. You are far more than your gender. You are far more than your sex. So I have a few things on my mind related, and I was reading something and I was watching something else, and I'll get to all of that. But thinking about identity, and this video is going to be a little bit more philosophical than normal for me, but what it means to be identity. And I thought I would go back and start with the etymology. So those long-time viewers of this channel know that I'm a big fan of looking at the roots of words and where they came from. And identity is interesting because it doesn't quite match with how we define identity in terms of psychology, or even in terms of the woke, really. Or no, actually, it might be closer to what the woke think of as an identity here, and it's very interesting, actually. So identity as a word comes from the French, sameness, oneness, state of being the same. Medieval Latin, identitatem, I believe I pronounced that like. The nominative is identitas. Sameness, ultimately from the Latin idem, which is the same. Just means the same. So identity is something that is the same. And that's really interesting and different than what you'd expect. I'm not quite sure how the word actually relates necessarily to what we think of as identity and how it's defined in psychology or in any number of how you might even define identity yourself. Let's put it that way. But identity, you might think of identity differently, but I think of identity myself. I think the Psychology Today section is actually pretty close to what I think of it with identity. Identity encompasses the memories, experiences, relationships, and values that create one's sense of self. So this amalgamation creates a steady sense of who one is over time, even as new facets are developed, incorporated into one's identity. Everybody struggles with existential questions such as, who am I? Who do I want my future self to be? One reason why maybe the answer is so complex. Identity includes the many relationships that people cultivate, such as their identity as a child, friend, partner, and parent. It involves external characteristics which a person has little or no control, such as height, race, or socioeconomic status. Bear in mind, that's not the only thing. Identity also encompasses political opinions, moral attitudes, and religious beliefs, all of which guide the choices one makes on a daily basis. People who are overly concerned with the impression they make, or who feel a core aspect of themselves, such as gender or sexuality, is not being expressed, can struggle acutely with their identity. Reflecting on the discrepancy between who one is and who one wants to be can be a powerful catalyst for change. So yeah, and there's a lot more down here, but I want to make a real point on something, and I think this is distinctly where the woke fail, where the anti-racism stuff fails, and I think it's a good point to point it out, is that, identity is a heck of a lot more than what race you are. It is so much more than your height. It is so much more than what race you are. It's so much more than your socioeconomic class or status or any number of those different things. But the woke conception of identity stops at honest God's truth, stops at the notion of the immutable characteristics. It stops entirely at that, at gender, at sexuality, or at race, at whatever kind of things. And it rarely includes things like your religion or what have you, which goes into moral attitudes and opinions and beliefs. But it stops so short, actually, in terms of the woke. And I guess that's a very big reason why so many of so many people reject this. I mean, all of this stuff about identity goes to who you are as an individual, who you are as your very self. And it's like for me, I hope to God I am never introducing myself to somebody as, I'm so-and-so. I'm going to walk up someday and say, hi, I'm a hi, I'm a white woman, straight white woman. Yeah, no. I'm not ever going to walk up to somebody and say that. That is not how I define my sense of self. And where the woke fail is that they don't recognize this. They don't recognize the individual sense of self at all. They think that it's all determined by what race you fall into and where that ends up on the power hierarchy. And so, you have your own values that you choose. You have your own thoughts. You have your own beliefs. You have your identity, who you are as a child, who you are as a professional, who you are as this, who you are as that. They're not necessarily all exactly the same thing. There's a great deal of code switching that goes on, switching from one role to another as you go from professional to what have you. I guarantee you who I am in my office and my workplace is not necessarily represented by who I am here on camera. In a way, you actually will get more of who I am. But anyway, that sense of self. So who are you? And I mean, one of the things I think they have it down here is, one of the questions of like, who are you is figuring out your sense of purpose. Yeah, I think so. Identity formation involves 3 key tasks: discovering one's potential, choosing one's purpose in life, and finding opportunities to exercise that potential and purpose. Identity is also influenced by parents and peers during childhood and experimentation in adolescence. So, a lot of this I think is very true. I think there's probably more to it than just that. Because again, I'm drawing this from Psychology Today, and you all watching this, and of course I've got my own thoughts on identity and what have you. But this idea of discovering and developing potential, figuring out what your likes, your dislikes are, what your values are, what all of those things are, that's important. That's an important sense of self. And notice that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with race, sex, gender, or the rest. Choosing one's purpose in life. So Aristotle actually talks about this quite a lot. He's like, goodness, we all desire to know, is what he says at one point. I think it's in Metaphysics, but he says we all desire to know. We all want to know something. We all want to know meaning. We all want a meaning. We all want to have purpose in our lives. And remember, like, the telos of a person is the idea of eudaimonia, which is not necessarily happiness per se, like the emotion happiness, but a sense of fulfillment, a sense of purpose, of meaning. And so many things, I think, in society are drawn back to that now, where you have so many people who just don't have a sense of purpose or don't have a sense of meaning. And so they glom onto anything that could give them a sense of purpose and meaning about their own lives, but not really necessarily take the time to think about it. I could be wrong for some people. I'm fair. I'm just shooting the breeze right now a little bit. But that sense of self is dramatically important, and it is, as they talk about up here, so much more than race. And it's particularly and primarily the values that people hold. The values that you hold, what professions do you, what do you think? What are your thoughts politically? Also, some of that, what are your thoughts, your beliefs, your values? What kind of character do you have? All those kind of things. That is your sense of self. And you also have very many experiences that are probably uniquely yours as a person. You do not necessarily share the same experiences as someone else all the time, though it's certainly possible. And all of that goes into forming a sense of self. And the problem with the woke, the anti-racism, as its contemporary, sort of professional name is, anti-racism kind of thing refers to it, is that it stops here at this notion of race being the most important thing about you, and because I know your race, then I can say that you have these thoughts, these experiences, what have you. Can you think of how condescending that is? Actually, in terms of the woke, that they have this thought. This is what you think. I know this is what you think because this is what your race is. No, you don't. You have no sense of a person's self, and maybe I'll go review that article on this channel again sometime. Chloe Valdry did a great piece last year in the Boston Globe, "The Hole in the Heart of Anti-Racism Training," where she talked about this. It's like, you don't know anything about a person from a first look other than what they look like. You cannot presume to know what a person's experiences are. You cannot presume to know that they have experienced oppression, per se. You cannot presume that. And you also cannot presume that one person's experiences, just because they're of the same race, is the same as another person's experience of the same race. Again, does experience translate to thought video that I did the other day? No, it doesn't. Just having an experience doesn't mean you have the same thoughts about that experience, the same worldview. You have to process an experience through your values, through your worldview, through your intellect to determine the meaning of that experience. And sometimes, yeah, you seek outside help. You seek people you can trust and talk it over with them. But the woke conception of identity is so limited and dehumanizing that it's really profoundly disgusting, actually, to me. And it's one of the reasons I reject the anti-racism woke nonsense so much, is because for all their talk about being inclusive, for all their talk about honoring the humanity of people and all this kind of stuff, they don't, actually. They're probably the most dehumanizing people ever. And I want to come back to this. Some folks may recognize this because I did actually review this article on my channel some weeks ago, but I wanted to point it out because it actually encompasses quite nicely, this whole section on identity encompasses quite nicely how the woke think of identity and their dehumanizing approach to it. Considering anti-racism in the geosciences, we cannot ignore the intersecting identities of marginalized people. Bullet note on that in a second. We must acknowledge the added burden of inequalities and oppression experienced by people and communities with these intersectional identities, such as Black women who are subjected to both sexism and racism, or when class, disability, gender expression, or sexual identity intersect with minoritized identities. Indeed, focusing on one axis of diversity has led to some gains only in more white women working in the geosciences, but has not increased the participation of BIPOC and other marginalized peoples. Okay. Here's the problem with this. In the other video, is diversity training effective? I actually pointed this out. One of the reasons that diversity efforts fail so spectacularly is because they focus on the differences and pit people against each other. That's not going to help, actually. This emphasis, not ignoring it. And I'm not saying ignore any such things as discrimination. Discrimination's bad. We all know that. But the overemphasis on the burdens and the inequalities instead of focusing on the commonalities between people actually makes it more likely that a DEI effort is going to fail, according to the research. Again, check the video on my channel. On this channel, is diversity training effective? I covered it there. So, while a singular approach to anti-discrimination cannot work for all groups, notice how they think of this. They think of people in groups. There's no sense of self in all of this. It's utterly dehumanizing. There is no sense of self. While a singular approach, explicitly anti-racist policies will lift all minorities, for example, reevaluating field policies to ensure safety for BIPOC geoscientists will also relieve various... Yeah, okay, whatever. Similarly, the presence of BIPOC in spaces expands opportunities for students to identify with allies and mentors. I hate the phrase allies. I'm sorry. Allies is so performative. It's so transactional with similar lived experiences. How about we just say experiences? Because, as again, lived experiences is stupid. Every experience is lived. Unless you, what is it if there's an experience you haven't lived yet? Is it an unlived experience? No, it's something that hasn't happened to you yet. It's an experience, not a lived experience. Community is important because, if not adequately prepared for the role, white mentors or other mentors with similar identities from those of the mentee, frankly, may do more harm than good for BIPOC or other minority students, and may reinforce an unjust and racialized hierarchy instead of providing meaningful mentoring for the minoritized students. White mentors or mentors from a majority group should be adequately prepared to mentor individuals from marginalized and underrepresented groups. Again, this isn't identity, this is identities. This is nothing about getting to know somebody's self, somebody's very heart, you're presuming, this immediately presumes in here, this article, that everybody has the same experiences if they're part of this group. And so these white people can't possibly be mentors to somebody who's of color. They have to be really, really well prepared. No, what about the fact that maybe they can relate as human beings? Maybe they can get to know each other on a sense of self level as an individual. this whole thing about the way they treat identity in the woke like this, or an anti-racism like this, if you prefer the professional lingo, it's actually entirely dehumanizing. Why are you assuming that people from marginalized backgrounds have the same experiences? Why are you presuming, let's go for an example here, why do you presume that everyone who's black has the same experiences? Because they don't acknowledge a sense of self. And this is why anti-racism is a failure and can be outright racist, because it is assigning beliefs to people, about people, on the basis of race, or on the basis of gender, or on the basis of sex, or any number of different things. It assigns beliefs about those people. It's profoundly dehumanizing. It's one of the many reasons I can't stand it myself, is because this conception of identity is so poorly done that it actually goes after a person's individual identity. A person's sense of self has no place in this conception of identity. And so it's not about identity. It's about community groups. It's not actually about caring about a person, empowering them to be resilient, and all this kind of stuff. It's profoundly dehumanizing. It's profoundly racist. It makes so many assumptions about people on the basis of their race. It's profoundly sexist, and they can make so many assumptions about somebody on the basis of their sex, and keep on going down the list. It's profoundly bigoted and discriminatory in its conception of identity. And again, I encourage you to reject it, and remember that your identity is a hell of a lot more than this notion of race, sex, gender, what have you. And to wrap it up here, I'm not going to go into all of this down here. Let's see. Before all outs, must collect data on the experiences of historically marginalized and action-oriented conversations. And again, I gotta say, are believing the experience. Again, I'm gonna have to say it here. Experience doesn't determine thought. I'm sorry. When you have an experience, you have to filter it through your mind, through your intellect, so people can have the same experiences and think completely different things about it. Again, does the experiences determine thought video on this channel? I went into that. So before I finish, I wanted to play a clip or two because of the reason that this video got prompted was actually seeing a really powerful and profound video cross my feed through Locals, actually. And again, I encourage you to join us over there at SciWorthy.locals.com. If you become a supporter, you can interact with scientists like me who are over there. I don't get a dime from it. Actually, I don't get a dime from it. I'm just there as a supporter. I actually pay there myself. And so I wanted to go into that because this great video came out. This is Corey here, and I'm not going to play the whole video, but I am going to play a segment of it here. I'm going to have to move myself out. Oh, no, I put it right there. Okay. I'm going to play a segment of it so that you can see his reaction. So in background here, I encourage you to go watch the video, but I will give you the background. Corey is has been a cinematographer. He's now actually a director of photography. So he works in cinema for 20 years. And he came out recently and talked about how anti-racism, slang woke, how anti-racism, but the slang woke actually resulted, in his view, in more racism and denied his sense of identity. And I'm going to play this a bit from about 2 minutes of this video here. But again, I encourage you to watch the whole thing because it's really profoundly moving, actually. And it reminded me so much of why I dislike this identity-based, the version of identity that comes from the woke. Because it is so profoundly dehumanizing. It is profoundly sexist and racist to say that you think someone is oppressed or incapable because of their race, sex, gender, what have you. It is profoundly dehumanizing. It's one of the reasons that I reject it so profusely, but he says it in such a great way. So I'm going to play this from here.
I've had my agents try to shop me for a project that was, interestingly enough, meant to market a certain book called White Fragility, and meet a lot of pushback from the marketing team regarding my credentials, despite my having an industry standard resume that includes shooting for outlets such as Vice and Rolling Stone. and having a demo reel that displays my aesthetic sensibilities and my professionalism on set. And the only thing that makes sense to me is that the core values of this woke ideology that has infiltrated the industry, namely that people who look like me are reduced to a set of essential characteristics that they can all be held collectively to, and that those characteristics are so immutable in their determinism that I cannot transcend the limitations of my birth. Now, to me, that smokes of racism. That smokes of a collectivist essentialism, and that supersedes my identity as an individual human being, which to me is all that should matter. How I show up as myself in a work situation, in a professional environment, in a friendship, in a relationship, these are the things that matter to me. Showing up as an individual and being judged on the basis of my individual merit, not as a token representative of a particular group, a group that I don't really fully belong to anyway, being someone who has a mixed heritage. Some of that is African, some of that is Caucasian, some of that is Jewish. Make of that what you will. And so coming from that mixed background, I have only ever been able to rely on being myself as an individual. That is.
And I'm going to say thank you, Corey. This video is amazing. And like I said, go watch it. I'm going to link it. Corey, if you're seeing this, thank you so much for putting it out there, because you're a brilliant young man. I wish you all the best in your battle, because he does go on to say here that he is sick with terminal cancer, stage 4. So my prayers for you, Corey. You're a brilliant young man, and thank you for saying all this. But he is absolutely right. The nonsense of anti-racism, in quotes here, or the slang that I prefer to use, woke, it is profoundly dehumanizing. And he says it so well that it actually passes judgment upon him and who he is on the basis of his race. And that is why I cannot take part in this anti-racism stuff. I don't take part in it because for all of its claims of trying to end racism, it does nothing more than continue it. It does nothing more than make it worse. And that is precisely because the woke anti-racism ideology reduces you to those immutable characteristics that do not matter so much in your sense of self as you would think. You are far more than your race. You are far more than your gender. You are far more than your sex. And I profoundly agree with Corey in this, in that I've had the same problem of feeling like I've been reduced to being a woman. And that's it for some people. That me being a woman is all they need to know what's about me, and that's not true. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for that, Corey. And I end this little philosophical tangent today, reminding you all, and particularly, I hope particularly some of the anti-racism proponents watching this, again, air quotes with that you are so much more. Your identity is so much more than the collective identities that the woke try to label on you, and don't let them ever tell you otherwise. That's it for me. I thank you all for watching. If you like the video, please share the video, subscribe to the channel. Again, like I said before, you can find me also over on SciWorthy.locals.com. And that's it for now, but I will catch you all again soon. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, my friends.